A couple of months ago, I was sitting outside a pizza place on Cape Cod with my mom and my husband. Just a very idyllic, unplugged type of vibe. This dad walks out of a pizza place with his teenage kid, and the kid turns to him and says, "Dad, don't call yourself an NPC. That's horrible." I started thinking, why did that kid have such a reaction to hearing his dad call himself an NPC? The first obvious answer is, of course, the cringe we all get when hearing our parents attempt slang. But I think there's something else there. I think NPC is a dehumanizing term. Dehumanization is a nuanced term, much debated in academia, but for this video, I'm going to be using Haslam and Stratemeyer's definition and say that dehumanization is the act of perceiving or treating people as if they are less than fully human. The nuances of dehumanization are, again, debated in academia, but it is generally agreed upon that dehumanization is extremely harmful and, at the very least, significantly related to things like prejudice, exploitation, support for policies that harm certain groups, and even genocide. To massively oversimplify, dehumanization is bad and is a contributing cause, element, or a consequence of many societies' ills. I'm going to resist the urge to give a ton of historical examples of dehumanization because this video is about the present and future of dehumanization, and I feel like historical examples have been covered well elsewhere. I'll link my sources and some further reading in the description for anyone who feels like they want to do some extra homework and read up on the history of dehumanization. This video isn't going to be about what internet slang I think is a problem. Terms like NPC are primarily symptoms, not causes, of what I see as a shift in dehumanization brought about by technology and the culture surrounding it. This is going to also be a video about AI, but I'm going to be treating AI as an ideology, not a technology. I promise that'll make sense very soon. Welcome back to Political-psych-abby, a channel where I talk about the psychology of politics and try to throw in the occasional joke. Let's start by talking about NPCs. For those of you who don't know, NPCs stands for non-player character. They're pretty ubiquitous in video games, even in the shape-rotating ones I like. There's nothing wrong with NPCs existing. I'm not going to culturally critique video games here, because we all know that if you criticize video games in a vaguely left-wing way, you got blamed for the rise of fascism a decade later. But NPCs do give people a model and a term for something that acts sort of like a person and you can have a social seeming interaction with, but is not a person and can be treated pretty much any way you like without moral consequence. Often the game even encourages or requires you to shoot or otherwise harm NPCs. Hopefully it's starting to dawn on you why calling a person an NPC is dehumanizing. I'm not going to argue that the cultural ubiquity of NPCs creates dehumanization necessarily, merely that it shapes the nature of dehumanization in the modern day in a way that's worth paying attention to. The relationship between NPCs and dehumanization is actually much stronger if you examine the history of the term as applied to real people. This does mean I have to talk about 4chan. Before I get into it, I want to specifically acknowledge the work of Rob Gallagher and Robert Topinka in their article, The Politics of the NPC Meme, Reactionary Subculture Practice and Vernacular Theory. They have kindly braved 4chan for us and written a very comprehensive account of the origins of the NPC meme. As far back as 2016, a 4chan user made a post on the video games board entitled, "Are You an NPC?" In this post, they expressed some very sad views about life, and for some reason I don't quite understand, dragged Toad from Frog and Toad into things. What did he ever do to anyone? He's just a little guy. The field of psychology can indirectly take some of the blame for the term getting a second wind. When poll users found a 2011 Psychology Today article about some people lacking inner speech. I went ahead and read that article. It's not very long, and I'll link it below. It's somewhat circuitously written, but I am fairly certain that the author is not saying that many people don't have thoughts about the world, just that they don't really talk to themselves in words inside their own head. I actually used to narrate my whole life aloud as a child to the point of declaring different chapters. I was a very strange kid. Now, I do have an extremely present internal monologue, I think almost entirely in words, which I hear aloud in my head, but that does not mean that I am any more human than someone who experiences the world inside their own head primarily in pictures or in a way that doesn't have a neat parallel in our external experience. Unfortunately, I don't think the users of Poll, which is a notoriously nasty and bigoted place, are really that interested in exploring the diversity of other people's internal experiences. I think think the fact that an article from 2011 blew up in 2018 probably had more to do with it fitting the current agenda than a sudden interest in inner experience and consciousness. Pretty immediately, the NPC meme was applied in a racist and generally bigoted manner, portraying Black and Asian people as NPCs controlled by Jews, specifically describing them as flesh golems on at least some occasions. It's probably too much to ask, but I would really prefer if anti-Semites didn't try and ruin golems for me and other folklore-loving Jews. I freaking love golems. Probably my favorite D&D character I ever made was a golemancer who controlled a golem that was just a ball of fists of clay named Fisty. It was fun. Anyway, back to this grim tale. The NPC memes were also quickly applied to liberals and leftists and pretty much every marginalized group in existence. The memes also quickly started to focus on dunking on people with popular opinions like hating Donald Trump or popular interests like Adele. Okay, this is a side point, but I think it is really funny for guys who are mostly into video games, one of the most popular and profitable interests in existence, to act like it's such a niche thing that makes them so interesting and original. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with liking video games. They can be really cool art or like a fun way to spend your time. The same way that there's nothing wrong with liking most mainstream things, but come on. I also think that acting like people having interests in common with lots of other people or having opinions other people also hold is inherently bad is a pretty poisonous stance. Liking a popular thing can actually be nice in that it is something that you can bond over with a lot of people. And also, some things are popular because they're nice. On screen right now is a thumbnail from a college humor sketch from 7 years ago about this, which is still annoyingly relevant. I mean, I'm not sure if people are still calling things basic, but the point is the same. This goes beyond a defense of pumpkin spice lattes. A reflexive hatred of consensus can be really politically toxic. Generally, a lot of people have to agree on a political thing and think about it in vaguely similar ways for democratic political action to occur. Treating people with popular likes and dislikes as less valid or human is just incredibly atomizing and disempowering. Only through solidarity can most people ever hope to stand up to the super wealthy and powerful in society. I go into this way more in my video on collective action, so I won't go into it a ton here. I do also want to say that I am absolutely not the first person to talk about how dehumanizing the NPC meme is. One of the first people to make that point was Cecilia D'Anastasio, writing for Kotaku. Her article makes a lot of good points, some of which I'm drawing from for this video, and I would recommend it. As you can probably guess, an article written by a woman who also reported on sexual harassment and gender discrimination in the video game industry in a publication like Kotaku did not get a massively positive response from the NPC meme's early users on places like Poll and r/Donald, and the use of the term continued to increase, especially on the right. This article may have even helped to increase it. I'm willing to talk about it now because this term is now widespread enough that I heard it outside in real life in an intergenerational conversation, so I don't think I'm at any risk of spreading the term. Gallagher and Topinka make the really interesting point that calling people NPCs was likely extra appealing to Trump fans because they had themselves been accused of being Russian bots. Well, Russian bots are a real thing. I do think that there is a tendency among liberals to overestimate how much of Trump's rise was due to Russian interference and bots specifically. It can be tempting to view your opponents as bots and NPCs. I think for liberals, a lot of this has to do with not wanting to acknowledge living in a country where a lot of people actually support a racist, misogynistic, corrupt fascist. I still see a tendency among liberals online to accuse the opposition of being bots. The example on screen at the moment is from just before the No Kings protest in October of 2025. While I agree that ignoring these sort of comments on Facebook is probably the right choice, we should acknowledge that at least most of them come from real people. I'm not saying this because I think we need to respect everyone's opinion. I'm saying this because countering large groups of people and countering clusters of bots require different strategies. You cannot win hearts and minds if you don't acknowledge that those hearts and minds exist. I absolutely get why this is tempting. I too like to think the best of people, but it is important to acknowledge that your opposition is primarily composed of real people, even if they are bad or severely misled people. I generally don't have a lot in common with Trump's base or the denizens of places like 4chan and r/Donald. I imagine a lot of them don't necessarily wish good things for me as a leftist, Jewish, climate activist, married to a communist. But I can relate to the experience of being called a bot. A number of years ago, I did some canvassing for a political campaign. In addition to the typical phone calls and door knocking, they had us send texts to people. I had a few people be truly awful to me over text, but I've had people be awful to me over the phone or even to my face. The ones that hurt me the most, for some reason, were the ones that thought I was a bot. I guess getting cussed out is one thing, but at least you're being acknowledged as a human being who actually holds your opinions. But being accused of a bot, well, there's no other way to say it. It is dehumanizing. Now, I might have some personal baggage that makes me extra bothered by this sort of thing, but I'm willing to bet it hurt the feelings of people like those 4chan users. And when people like that get their feelings hurt, they're pretty likely to lash out. Okay, now we understand how technological modes of thinking can feed into dehumanization and have been doing so. But how does AI play in? I think that its proliferation will only worsen this tech-infused dehumanization. That's partially because of AI's technical functions, but largely because of the ideology that is AI. Lanier and Weil put forward the idea of AI as an ideology in a 2020 Wired article while they were working as researchers at Microsoft. They state that AI is best understood as a political and social ideology rather than a basket of algorithms. The core of the ideology is that a suite of technologies designed by a small technical elite can and should become autonomous from and eventually replace rather than complement not just individual humans but much of humanity. The authors of this article are not trying to argue that all technology labeled as AI is dehumanizing and evil, nor am I. AI can be a very useful tool, and I'm generally in favor of making people's lives easier. What I'm not in favor of is massive unemployment without safety nets, stealing people's work, or the irresponsible use of power and water in a world already enduring environmental collapse. Unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of AI products that are able to effectively address all these concerns, in addition to concerns about dehumanization, but I'm willing to believe that they could potentially exist. I also want to add that on top of being an ideology, AI is to some extent a culture and an interconnected network of people. A lot of the most prominent AI critics run in the same circles as its biggest boosters and shareholders. Sometimes they are literally the same people. That's my working theory as to why so much of this criticism of AI rests on it working too well or being too powerful. Even AI critics are typically convinced that it represents an important element of the future. And I'm not going to say AI won't shape the future in significant ways. It already has proven itself not to be the next Bitcoin. It's not purely a technology waiting for a legitimate use propped up by excess capital and fossil fuels. Well, it's propped up by excess capital and fossil fuels, but it does have more uses than something like Bitcoin. Just for a sec, I want to think about my own relationship to AI culture and how far removed I am from it. I think the answer is that I sit on the edge of it. I don't work in tech, but I've had jobs that involved working with programmers and other people in tech. I teach at an elite university, so some of my students are likely to work in AI. Some of them are already using it to cheat on assignments. The first time I went to a talk about negative consequences of AI was the better part of a decade ago. I think they were calling it big data then. My mom is closer to AI culture than I am. She's a hard scientist who has been doing data visualization and data science stuff for a long time and has a lot of contacts in Silicon Valley. I'm being deliberately vague here because there are so few people, especially women, doing exactly what my mother does, that if I was more specific, I might literally dox both of us. I think she might have multiple ex-boyfriends who worked in venture capital. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. Basically, what I'm saying is that I grew up in, and to some extent still exist on the periphery of that elite culture that produces AI technology and, perhaps more importantly, AI ideology. But I've always been a bit of a Luddite. I double majored in history and psychology in college. I have tried to learn how to code, but I hate it so much. Last week, I made a bag from 2 balls of yarn. I also suspect that I run in much more diverse circles than the peak of the AI elite, especially economic. I will regularly have friends over for dinner because they can't afford to go out to eat. I don't think that's an experience that a lot of the people who are producing AI products at the highest level or even necessarily writing about them have very frequently. What I'm saying is that I do not have to be that far outside the AI cultural bubble to see the potential for dehumanization. Yet, this effective AI is less discussed than literal sci fi scenarios. I think that it's ridiculous and reflects how problematically insular the AI community can be. A lot of AI products and even AI criticism originate from the same sort of high techy, high achieving environments that I grew up in. I have some fond memories of these sorts of environments and still find myself in them from time to time, but there's an implicit value system in them that I worry about. In these sorts of environments, your worth comes from how useful you are, and usefulness often relates to intelligence, which itself is pretty narrowly defined. Useful is everything. Smart is everything. Identity is tied really strongly to people's perceptions of themselves as smart, and the worst thing you can be is stupid. This is not a good system for defining what a person is. It is especially a problematic worldview in the context of AI and dehumanization. There are already people who are less useful than AI tools. And there have pretty much always been people who are negatively useful, at least if you define usefulness in the very economic way that a lot of our leaders and leaders in tech do. For most uses, I will find ChatGPT more useful than a baby or a person with severe dementia. This is a stock photo. I have no idea this man's mental state. And I don't even find ChatGPT that useful. But I genuinely worry about anyone who thinks ChatGPT is more human than even the most limited human being. In some contexts, there are people dumber than AI tools, but I would argue that that doesn't make them less human. If we keep defining humanity in terms of intelligence and usefulness, and AI tools keep getting better, more and more people will slip below the line of AI intelligence and usefulness, and people who think smart is everything will use this to dehumanize them. AI ideology is also key to dehumanization and alienation in labor specifically. Look at me talking about alienated labor, gonna earn those bread 2 points 3 years too late. Essentially, in many cases where human labor cannot be replaced by computers, AI ideology can still obscure the presence of human labor via something called ghost work. In ghost work, people, typically poorly paid people in low income countries, do small, segmented, but often grueling work like content moderation or labeling things for AI models. Often the platforms that these workers work on do not refer to the workers by name and encourage those requesting work to treat the workers as interchangeable software components rather than people. There's also an undeniable racial element here. Cave and Hall posit that part of the utopian dream of AI is in part having the disproportionately minority lower classes of society hidden behind or replaced by AI, even if that's not the explicitly stated vision of high-profile AI boosters. Although, give Elon Musk like 6 months and we'll see if he starts saying stuff like that, like blatantly. There's a lot of interesting and important work on AI and race that I do not have the time or understanding to go into fully here. The main thing I want to highlight is that not only is AI likely to shape dehumanization, much older forms of dehumanization relating to race, gender, and class shape AI, and we should pay attention to that. I'd initially intended to put a picture of real ghost workers here after making the little joke with the cartoon ghosts. I even worried that the little ghosts might be in bad taste. But the sector is so deliberately obfuscated that the Google image search for ghost work also shows mostly little illustrations of ghosts doing work. And that's not people not using the term, that's people illustrating the term that way. The exceptions are primarily pictures of people who are likely stock models, not actual ghost workers. I think this is actually a pretty good illustration of the dehumanization of ghost workers. The humanity of ghost workers goes largely unacknowledged, and in and of itself, that is horrible. But I worry that this is just the beginning, that the tendency to mistake or deliberately portray people as not people, but instead a bot or AI, will only spread, and that we will increasingly see it in the political arena. I want to introduce you to the concept of the liar's dividend if you've not already encountered it. This is the idea that as it gets easier to generate fake things, especially images with technology like AI, it gets harder to prove reality. This is, to some extent, already happening. Trump falsely accused Kamala Harris of using AI to fake the size of a crowd at a rally in Michigan. I think this is actually a lot more sinister than the political ego thing it appears to be on the surface. Although, let's be clear, I think it is a political ego thing for Trump. Every person in the crowd for that rally had taken time out of their lives to show support for their preferred candidate and slate of policies. These are real people with real politics. This goes back to what I was saying before. in the section about bots. It's about refusing to acknowledge that your opposition is composed of real people, and how that's different and probably worse for the state of society than just disagreeing with those people. I want to be crystal clear here. I would also be upset if Harris had falsely accused Trump of faking his crowd size. What I care about here is acknowledging real people as real political actors, not Kamala Harris's crowd size specifically. In the spirit of transparency and stating the obvious, I will say that I would certainly prefer if she were president right now. I don't know if that would make this incredibly uninspiring mural here in Chicago about her funnier or less funny. As bad as accusing a real crowd of being fake is regarding a political rally, there are also many situations in which the liar's dividend can have less abstract consequences. The Spanish minister Alfonso Destis attempted to discredit evidence of violence in Catalonia by claiming it was a deepfake. And in Gabon, claims that a video showing the president as healthy were a deepfake helped spur an unsuccessful coup. These two prior examples are from an article by Schiff, and Bueno entitled "The Liar's Dividend: Can Politicians Claim Misinformation to Evade Accountability?" The authors did find that under experimental conditions at least, claiming that video evidence was fake was fairly ineffective. But as deepfakes improve in quality and people become more aware of them, denying the veracity of real footage or photos may become a more successful and frequently attempted strategy. Photographs and videos are one of the key ways of documenting things like genocide and war crimes, and the last thing we need as a society is for these things to become easier to deny. Dehumanization is already high in situations like genocide and war, and denying people's humanity and their experiences in these situations is especially dangerous and deadly. I want to add that when I first started researching this video, I thought there would be a fair amount of literature on AI and dehumanization for me to draw on, but I was surprised by how little there is. There are AI theorists, especially from minority backgrounds, that have done some great work on how AI affects people unequally, and I do not want to minimize their work. The thing is, the person writing about AI in a way where you or I come across their work is not usually the same person getting frequently mistaken for a bot and treated as one. So if you have been mistaken for a bot or had someone say that an image of you or your community is AI when it isn't, please speak up if you can. I want to hear from you. Your stories and your humanity are important. I also think it's really important that if you use AI to represent something, especially a person, you declare that it's AI. Because the less frequently people are told something isn't AI when it is, the easier it'll be for other people to successfully assert that they are people. Now, there'll be some lying about this, of course, but maybe don't personally lie. I think if you have to deny that something is AI for AI to be used successfully in a case, then don't use AI for that. Dehumanization is unfortunately a very disempowering experience. One can engage in all sorts of philosophical shenanigans to prove one's humanity, and some people, I'm sure, are into that. But personally, I like the approach of Emily M. Bender, an AI-critical computational linguist, and woman sick of being asked if she's a parrot. To quote from her article, Resisting Dehumanization in the Age of AI, I now often get asked, how do I know you're not just a stochastic parrot? I've decided that I'm not going to have conversations with people who will not posit my humanity as a basic axiom of the conversation. I think this is a good approach. What is truly unfortunate is that people like the ghost workers I was talking about earlier may routinely have to have interactions with people who do not posit their humanity as a basic axiom of the interaction. In a review article entitled The Neuroscience of Human and Artificial Intelligence Presence, Harris came to the conclusion that people do think and act differently when they interact with a person versus an AI. There are even some differences visible in brain imaging for these interactions. The concept of false negatives and false positives is often used in psychology and many other scientific fields. A false positive is when you think something is something and it isn't. If what you're testing for is humanity, then a false positive is thinking that something is a real person or people when it isn't. There are real and serious consequences to this, but they are widely discussed. What I think is wildly underdiscussed and underaddressed is false negatives, thinking that someone isn't a person when they are. Whether or not dehumanization overall is increasing is an open question, but dehumanization is shaped by the context in which it occurs. Researchers on dehumanization often distinguish between mechanistic and animalistic dehumanization, as in, are the dehumanized people being likened to animals or machines? I think we're likely to see a lot of mechanistic dehumanization involving concepts like bots, NPCs, and AI. The new world of technology that is emerging will mean that we'll need to learn to recognize and combat new forms of dehumanization. Okay, how the heck do we combat these emerging forms of dehumanization? Well, there is not much research yet on how to combat these specific forms. There is research on how to combat dehumanization more broadly. One of the main ways to counter dehumanization and prejudice in general is through something called intergroup contact, especially positive intergroup contact. Basically, if you have a positive interaction with people different from you, especially if you share a common goal during that interaction, you're more likely to have positive or at least nuanced and humanized views of those people. Unfortunately, I see much of AI as antithetical to intergroup contact because it's generally anti contact, which is to say, AI products are generally designed so people interact with fewer other people and interact with other people less frequently and less directly. We talk a lot about echo chambers. I'd argue that an echo chamber with just you and a piece of tech designed to please you in it is massively worse than an echo chamber full of real people who think mostly similarly to you, but are still like other people who might differ from you at least in some way or be able to call you on your bullshit. Contact does not even have to be direct to be effective. The classic example of this given in psychology classes is a study that found that college students watching Will and Grace correlated with decreased levels of homophobia. This was especially true for participants without much exposure to gay people in their lives. But I worry that even this indirect contact could also be reduced in an AI-dominated future. If I go to an art museum, turn on my TV, or even look at graffiti on a bathroom stall, I'm seeing something made by another person. I'm seeing another perspective that could be very different from my own. If I generate an image with AI, it's not super likely that it'll allow for this sort of indirect contact. I remember a few years ago hearing about an AI venture that proposed to slot avatars of users into beloved properties that those users already like. To me, this is so antithetical to the humanizing potential of stories that it's like genuinely disturbing and gross. Perhaps the most profitable future for AI is one in which each person believes that they are the only real person in the world. I don't want to live in that world. So, what do we do about it? We can specifically acknowledge the humanities of others and not call people bots just because they disagree with us. We can identify publicly when a bot or AI is being used and support policies that will make others do the same. We can value people beyond purely economic terms and support policies that respect people's humanity and help to fulfill their basic needs. I feel like there are some pretty good reasons to support those policies, even without AI-infused dehumanization. But hey, if this is what pushes you over the edge to thinking that like everyone deserves food and healthcare, I'll definitely take that. In terms of what each of you can do to get started countering these emerging forms of dehumanization, I would start with contact, especially intergroup contact. Get out there and just hang out with people. I'm not saying you have to hang out with anyone whose politics actively endanger you. In fact, I'd recommend against it. But I would recommend having a few things in your life that bring you into contact with people from different backgrounds. If you already have some things like that in your life, great. Prioritize them and bring other people into them. This is probably the only political video that's going to end with a call to join a community sports league or a knitting circle or a D&D group. I think that is actually the best and most concrete suggestion I can give you right now based on this. Support the community activities around you, especially free and low-cost ones. The bonds we have with our fellow humans are precious and essential. We cannot let them be destroyed in a quest for profit, control, and scraps of comfort.